What's up guys, Sean here, and today I want to talk about why the far left, progressives, whatever you want to call them, don't disagree with conservatives necessarily. They actually hate conservatives. Now I want to start off this video with a little bit of a thought experiment that I want you to keep in mind as we go through the course of this video. If you were to get in a wooden boat in Europe and sail the course of the Atlantic to North America, but during the course of that sail, you had to change out every board in the boat, by the time you landed in North America, would you be in the same boat that you left in? Now, it's a thought experiment, and you don't have to have an answer to that question right now, but I want that to be something that you keep in mind as we go through the course of this video. Now, recently there were some arrests related to an event which Dave Rubin attended in Canada. If you guys aren't familiar with the event that I'm referring to in specific, you may remember this video. Now, of course, that video went viral amongst conservative and libertarian circles because it's really strange to see a young group of far-left activists holding up an obviously elderly person from going to a speech that they might disagree with. It looks really aggressive, it looks really bad, and for a lot of people on the conservative and libertarian side, and even on the moderate side, it is really bad. But the question that I want to answer today is not whether or not that is objectively bad. The question that I want to answer is why those liberal activists, why those left-wing activists, would do something like that to an obviously elderly person. Like, what in their mind would justify this action? Now, I want to be clear, the point of this video is not to justify the actions seen in the video that I just shown you. The purpose of this video is to determine what would make somebody not only feel justified in taking those actions, but feel virtuous for taking those actions. Now, there's a famous study of liberals, conservatives, and moderates, and I'm sure a lot of people have already heard of it, and it comes from the book The Righteous Mind. And what this book did, or what this portion that was in the book did, this study, was give out surveys to conservatives, moderates, and liberals. This was all based on conservatives, moderates, and liberals and their own self-identification. And in these surveys, they asked conservatives, moderates, and liberals to answer questions based on what they value. But then with other sample groups, they asked conservatives, moderates, and liberals to answer questions based on what they think people in other categories value. And what this survey determined was that conservatives and moderates were far more accurate in determining what other political beliefs actually value. And in fact, the more liberal you were, the less accurate you were in describing what conservatives value. Now, while most people stop there and they say that liberals don't get conservatives, and the more far left you are, the less you get conservatives, it's actually incredibly important to delve a little bit more into the details and figure out what exactly liberals don't get about conservatives. And for instance, one of the most inaccurate questions that liberals got wrong when they were supposed to be playing the roles of conservatives is whether or not justice is one of the most important values in a society. Liberals overwhelmingly got this question wrong under the belief that conservatives don't value justice. Now, considering you're on a channel called Actual Justice Warrior, you can understand why I think this is one of the most troublesome portions of this survey. Now, the reason that I find this troubling, and I think that you should find it troubling, is because we're in a scenario now where one side, the right, thinks that the other side, the left, is incorrect, while the left thinks that the right is evil. Now, because of this phenomenon, when a conservative or right-leaning person tells a leftist that they don't believe that they are pursuing justice in the most effective way, and what they're advocating for is likely to lead to negative outcomes, what the leftist hears is not what the conservative said. By the time that boat has sailed across from that person's mouth to the leftist's ears, the leftist has heard that the conservative is advocating for injustice. The conservative believes that even if all the boards in the boat have been swapped out, that the essence of the boat is still there, and the leftist is seeing the same boat that the conservative sent out. Conversely, the left is seeing a brand new boat that has nothing to do with what the conservatives sent across the ocean. And we see evidence of this whenever we see leftists try to discuss the views of conservatives, or whenever leftists talk about their policies versus conservative policies. To them, it is not a battle of ideas where you debate policies and you come up with the best possible outcome with the least amount of negative trade-offs. To them, their policies are morally right. Your policies are evil, and the only reason you would pursue your policies as opposed to their policies is because you are evil. I do a lot of videos about the Young Turks on this channel, and you need look no further than the Young Turks to understand exactly what I'm saying. Just look at the way that TYT founder Cenk Uygur and Kyle Kalinske, the host of Secular talk about their candidates in the Justice Democrats, which is something that they both founded together, when they lose and when they win elections. Whenever they win elections, it is because they are the morally right candidate and they push forward the morally correct policies. Conversely, whenever they lose elections, it's because of some external factor, like money in politics, people being tricked by Republicans, people being tricked by establishment Democrats into voting against their self-interest.
I think that there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right.
You see, when you operate under a philosophy of absolute moral certainty, it's impossible for you to see how somebody else can arrive to a different conclusion. When your candidates win, the morally correct thing happens. When individuals oppose you, they must be evil. When a large group of people choose somebody that you view to be evil over your morally correct candidate, that can only occur because they were tricked by the evil that your opponent employs. Now, if you need a more clear and obvious example of this, look at the summary of my debate with Cenk Uygur's nephew that I did on his Twitch channel. I'll link my video in the description box below and in the iCard. Now, during the course of that 2-hour conversation, I was not able to move Cenk Uygur's nephew off of a single point, no matter how many facts or pieces of evidence I tried to present to him. And that's because we had two completely different objectives. I went on to convince him that he was wrong, to present evidence against examples of him making inaccurate statements to demonstrate that his facts were inaccurate. But he had me on to insinuate that I was evil. That's why after I make any type of point, he always would accuse me of being some kind of morally inferior person. And you guys know the tricks: racist, sexist, homophobe, Islamophobe, etc., etc.
It's an 86-page report.
Oh, the 86-page report? No, I did not, no.
Okay, so in that report, it's not a matter of interpretation on who was telling the truth. All of the forensic evidence supports Officer Darren Wilson. And your network has been putting out for the past 6 years that Michael Brown was innocent and that he had his hands up.
You're supposed to, I feel like you're supposed to agree with me on this. Libertarians usually don't like the fact that the state has a monopoly on violence, but maybe because he was black, it doesn't really matter.
I do want to address your point, because you like try to slide in a little jab at me calling me a racist.
No, I didn't say that. I said maybe. More often than not, it's that.
Because he's black. You know what the point. You know what the point of you saying that was.
Now, the reason that when you're listening to that conversation, you think that Cenk's nephew and I cannot get on the same page is because Cenk's nephew can literally not get on the same page as me. Because he saw the conversation as him battling evil, while I saw the conversation as a chance to explain to him where he's misinterpreting data, as a chance to highlight pieces of data that he might have overlooked. But it is that absolute moral certainty in Cenk's nephew's worldview that prevents him from entertaining other ideas and information that conflicts with his worldview. Again, every fact, figure, and statistic that I used to build my boat and send it along the way to him was disassembled and replaced by the time it actually got to him, so he doesn't see the same boat that I see. Now, I want to move on from this boat thought experiment, but I thought it was important to highlight this phenomenon because this is exactly what the left is referring to when they say that Republicans are giving out dog whistles to their base. they are hearing something different from what you are saying and what you are likely intending to say. Now, I want to move on from this analogy so I can get to the promise of the premise of this video, and that is me explaining why young people would feel justified in holding up and harassing an elderly woman to prevent her from attending a speech by Dave Rubin. And there's a video that I think best exemplifies the leftist attitudes towards conservative speakers like Dave Rubin and the people that attend those speeches. And it's about the PewDiePie pipeline, or the Pewdie pipeline, whatever, and how edgy humor, according to this person and a lot of people on the left, eventually leads to violence. Now, the entire basis of this video is predicated on what I would consider a very dangerous concept called stochastic terror, which may be a phrase that you've started to hear people in the left wing say over and over again when referring to right-wing speech that they disagree with.
Stochastic terrorism is very different. It's a much more vague and structureless phenomenon with no clear leaders and no direct calls for violence. In mathematics, a stochastic process is a system that changes over time in a way that's random, at least in part.
Now, on its surface, this may seem similar to an argument that is often made by Ben Shapiro about turning the proverbial temperature up on the rhetoric in this country and the negative consequences that that could lead to. However, this is much different because what this seeks to do, rather than be a predictive model, is actually retroactively blame people for the actions of violent actors by backwards tracing it to that person. And one of the ways that you could tell that this logic is fundamentally flawed is that the precursor that they use to describe the terror that they're talking about is synonymous with the word random. Now, the premise and this video is fundamentally flawed in a number of ways. Chief among them is that the person that they are trying to draw a straight line from PewDiePie to actually did mention PewDiePie in order to get people to associate him with PewDiePie and thus advocate for the restrictions of the freedoms of people like PewDiePie and people that are on the right side of the political spectrum. So the video's premise is actually playing directly into the hands of this terrible person. But despite that, I think that that is a fundamental flaw of this video, despite the fact that I think that it's actually incredibly irresponsible to present information in that way, in light of the fact that the perpetrator of the crime being highlighted in this video wanted the information to be presented in this exact way in order to perpetuate his political ideology. There are nuggets of this video that can give us insight on how the far left views the world. And the most important thing we can take away from the left-wing perspective on this issue is this pyramid of violence. This pyramid is a perfect example of how the left wing views the right wing and their rhetoric and what they believe are the consequences of letting people disagree with them in public are. Attitudes and beliefs lead to cultural microaggressions, which lead to verbal expression, which lead to violence, which cap off with genocide. And let me be clear, I don't want you to dismiss this pyramid straight out of hand. What I want you to do is put yourself in the position of somebody who believes that this is an accurate depiction of what would happen if the ideas, for example, that are given in this video are allowed to flourish throughout society. Now, with that open mind, I want to play for you what the creator of this video thinks that the foundational beliefs of this pyramid are.
Stage 1. Attitudes and beliefs. At the bottom of the pyramid are attitudes and beliefs, cultural phenomena that nearly all of us have internalized to some extent or another. These are things like stereotypes and harmful assumptions that are difficult to avoid in our society. Here are just some examples of racist attitudes and beliefs that nearly all of us have internalized to some extent or another. Black people are more likely to be criminals.
Okay, so you might have been able to detect that we already have a major problem. According to the creator of this video, one of the foundational racist beliefs in society that are a part of a pyramid that leads up to genocide is that black people are more likely to be criminals. The problem with that is a true statement in the United States of America, and it's not racist to say it whatsoever. In fact, one of the reasons why it's so important to talk about black crime is because when you delve deep into the numbers, it actually disproves the idea of a one-to-one connection between race and crime. For instance, in New York City, we have an African American population of 2.1 million people. Now, while it is true that the rates of crime, specifically violent crime, are higher among that African American population in New York City, their crime rates are much lower than the rates of crime in the city of Chicago. Now, the city of Chicago, which is between a third and a fourth the size of the city of New York, has an African American population of 800,000, which is less than half the African American population in New York City. Now, the overall murders in the city of Chicago are more than double what we see yearly in New York City. And what makes that number even more startling is that the population of New York City, as I just said, is much higher. So the per capita rates are much higher in Chicago than they are in New York City, because the raw number is higher in Chicago than in New York City, which is much more populated. Now, if race was the only factor, or even the predominant factor in violent crime rates, then we wouldn't see such a disparity between a group that is demographically the same, but in different cities. And by the way, everybody always talks about Chicago due to the fact that the raw number of murders are high, but there are cities in the United States, particularly Detroit, St. Louis, and Baltimore, that are often in the top 3 for homicide rate, that have per capita rates nearly double what Chicago has. You see, one of the reasons that I got myself educated in criminal justice, and one of the reasons that I believe it's important to talk about crime, and yes, that includes black crime, is because A, if you actually properly identify the problem, then you can design interventions to reduce crime, and you can look at a city that has much lower crime and copy that model and apply it to other cities and see what works. But B, it actually disproves racist narratives. If black population was the predominant factor in crime, New York City would have much higher crime rates than Chicago, St. Louis, and all these other cities with significantly lower black populations.
Muslims are more likely to be terrorists.
So there's 2 things wrong with this. The first one should be obvious. Islam is not a race. You said that these were racist notions in society, but I'm going to give you that one because a lot of people substitute Islam for Arab, so I'll grant you that one. And the second thing is that this is yet another true statement that you are saying is racist and problematic and the foundation of a pyramid that leads to genocide. Now, the idea that this is false rests on the idea that per capita numbers don't matter, and you're just taking the overall raw numbers and making extrapolations based on that. Now, while it is true that if there is an attack in the United States, the perpetrator is more likely to be white, that is related to the fact that 63% of the population of the United States is white non-Hispanic. And because white people represent 63% of the population, you would expect them to be 63% of the people committing these types of attacks in the United States of America. However, something like 20 to 30% of these types of attacks in the United States of America are perpetrated by Muslims, and Muslims represent less than 1% of the population of the United States. So while 63% of the attacks by white people makes them the majority, that means that they are not out of line with their population, but 25 to 30% of the attacks coming from a Muslim population representing 1% means that they are 25 times more likely to commit that type of attack than a white person.
Gay people are more likely to be promiscuous.
Okay, so somewhere this guy completely lost the plot, and I was willing to grant him the Muslim-Arab flip-flop that he seemed to do to make that a racial thing, but gay people are not a race. That doesn't make any sense. And also, the gay people being more promiscuous, I don't think that's a thing that people believe. I could be wrong. Okay, so I rewatched that portion of the video, and I believe what he was trying to say is that there's a perception that gay men are more promiscuous than heterosexuals. And I actually do believe that that's the case, because men have more of a predilection toward promiscuity than women do, and gay men are just normal men that are attracted to men, so that makes perfect sense. Now, the reason I'm spending so much time on these individual examples that form the foundation of this pyramid that eventually leads to genocide is because it's important to realize that this person believes these to be false when they are in fact 100% true. And the fact that they're true, and I can present evidence to demonstrate that they're true, doesn't change the fact that this person believes that accepting these premises will lead eventually, or is a stepping stone toward, genocide. You see, when you accept the premise that people who disagree with you aren't people who are disagreeing with you, but they are in fact people pushing evil, when you accept the premise that them believing and thinking things that disagree with your political positions are the first step among just a few steps on the way to genocide, then all of a sudden an individual act of aggression in the name of preventing that genocide is justified. You see, it's telling to me that the creator of this video is extremely wishy-washy on whether or not PewDiePie knows what he's doing is wrong, or whether or not PewDiePie is fully responsible for the actions of this person, or whether or not PewDiePie's even doing this intentionally or unintentionally. But when the question comes up, and it's not even phrased as a question, when the idea comes up that PewDiePie's channel should be banned, it is stated as a fact that doing so will be a net good.
I want to pat ourselves on the back and call it a victory if we get one of these YouTubers taken down, but I'm telling you, even if PewDiePie and his entire channel disappear tonight, somebody new will spring up and take his place tomorrow.
And again, if you put yourself in the shoes of a far leftist who actually believes that not policing thoughts that they disagree with will lead eventually to genocide, you can understand why that is said with such moral certainty. The irony of this, of course, is that when you have this level of religiously minded certainty, combined with the fact that you think that if you don't destroy your enemies, you will then be destroyed, is that this mentality is a fascist mentality. Ideas and thoughts you disagree with are a threat to your vision for the world. You are not only justified in meeting ideas and thoughts that you disagree with physical violence, it's noble, it's heroic to do so. This do or die mentality that makes people feel heroic for engaging in thuggish behavior is a fascist mentality. But when you're fighting what you believe to be pure evil, a threat to your very survival, the ends justify the means because winning is survival. Anyway, that's all I really have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this type of video. It's a little bit different, a little bit of a change of pace from what I normally do. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias. If you want to support me, you can do so via one-time donation on PayPal or Venmo, or you can do so monthly on Patreon or Subscribestar. This has been me doing a deep dive into the leftist mind. Till next time.